He stood up in that courtroom, smoothed the lapels of his $3,000 suit, and actually laughed in her face. Roman Thorne thought he was untouchable. He had the best lawyers money could buy, the media on his side, and a billion-dollar empire he claimed he built alone. He looked at his ex-wife, Sarah, shivering in her thrift store coat, and treated her like a nuisance he was about to scrape off his shoe. He thought he had won before the gavel even banged, but he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the dusty, forgotten will of a man he had called a failure. Sarah's father, Arthur. When the judge broke the seal on that document, the laughter in the courtroom didn't just stop, it died. And Roman's empire? It was about to crumble in a way no one saw coming. This is the story of how the ultimate betrayal met the ultimate justice. To understand the silence that eventually fell over Courtroom 4B in the Superior Court of Seattle, you have to understand the noise that preceded it. And the loudest noise in any room was usually Roman Thorne. Roman was the kind of man the modern world worships. At 34, he was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a tech firm specializing in algorithmic trading software. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, steely blue eyes, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was the golden boy of the Pacific Northwest tech scene. Sarah Jenkins, on the other hand, was the shadow behind his light. They had met 10 years prior at a coffee shop in Portland. Back then, Roman wasn't a CEO. He was a frantic, unwashed coder with a laptop held together by duct tape and an eviction notice in his pocket. Sarah was a graphic designer, struggling to pay off her student loans, but possessed of a warmth that Roman desperately needed. For 6 years, Sarah carried him. When Roman couldn't pay his share of the rent, Sarah worked double shifts. When Roman needed a seed investment for his first server, Sarah sold her grandmother's vintage jewelry, the only heirloom she had left. She cooked, she cleaned, she proofread his pitches, and she soothed his ego when the investors slammed doors in his face. "We're a team, Sarah," he used to whisper to her at 2 a.m., his eyes bloodshot from coding. "When I make it, you make it. We're building an empire." And they did. Or rather, the empire was built, but the walls were constructed to keep her out. The change happened slowly, then all at once. When Thorne Dynamics went public, the money didn't just change Roman, it metastasized in him. He traded his Toyota for a McLaren. He traded their cozy apartment for a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Sound. And eventually, he decided to trade his wife. The divorce was brutal. It wasn't just that he left her, it was how he did it. He had her served with papers on their 7th anniversary at the restaurant where they had their first date. He didn't even show up. He sent a courier. The settlement offer was insulting. A pittance of monthly alimony for 3 years and permission to keep her own car. No stock options. No share of the company she helped fund. Roman's argument was simple and cruel. Sarah was a homemaker and a distraction. He claimed he was the sole genius behind the code. Sarah, heartbroken and humiliated, initially wanted to sign just to get away from him. But then she found the emails. She discovered that Roman had been hiding assets, millions of dollars diverted into shell companies in the Caymans. Worse, he was mocking her to his friends. In a group chat revealed during discovery, Roman had written, "She actually thinks she owns a piece of the algorithm. She's a graphic designer. She drew the logo. I did the math. She's lucky I'm giving her anything at all. She's just like her loser father." That was the spark. Sarah's father, Arthur Jenkins, had died 2 years prior. He was a quiet, eccentric man who spent his life tinkering in his garage, smelling of solder and sawdust. Roman had always despised Arthur, calling him a wasted mind and a hobbyist because Arthur never monetized his inventions. Roman refused to attend Arthur's funeral, claiming he had a board meeting. Reading that text message, Sarah felt something inside her snap. It wasn't greed, it was a need for correction. She hired a lawyer, not a shark like Roman's, but an old family friend named Mr. Henderson, and she sued for 50% of Thorn Dynamics. The media called it the gold digger versus the visionary. The internet trolls tore Sarah apart, but she stood firm. And that led them to that rainy Tuesday in November, inside courtroom 4B, where Roman Thorn was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old wood, but around the defense table it smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. Roman sat flanked by 3 lawyers. The lead attorney was Marcus Sterling, a man known in Seattle legal circles as the Butcher. Sterling cost $500 an hour, and he wore a smile that suggested he had already eaten the canary. On the plaintiff's side, Sarah sat alone with Mr. Henderson. Henderson was a good man, decent and thorough, but he looked like a golden retriever trying to fight a pack of wolves. He shuffled his papers nervously. Sarah wore a simple grey suit, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. The courtroom was packed. Tech bloggers, journalists, and curious onlookers filled the gallery. Everyone wanted to see the visionary take down his greedy ex-wife. Judge Elena Harriman entered the room. She was a stern woman in her 60s, with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a reputation for zero tolerance for theatrics. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harriman said, her voice dry, "you may proceed with your opening statement regarding the division of assets." Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't walk, he glided. He approached the jury box. Though this was a bench trial, he performed for the audience, and then turned his gaze on Sarah. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice smooth as velvet, "we are here today because of a delusion that support equates to creation. My client, Mr. Thorn, built Thorn Dynamics from the ground up using his intellect, his coding skills, and his sleepless nights. Ms. Jenkins provided coffee. She provided laundry services. These are noble tasks, surely, but they do not entitle one to half of $1 billion intellectual property." Roman leaned back in his chair, smirking at Sarah. He mouthed the word, "greedy." Sterling continued, pulling up a projection of a timeline. "Ms. Jenkins claims she provided seed money. We acknowledge she sold some jewelry for $4,000. Mr. Thorn is willing to reimburse her that amount with interest. Let's call it $10,000. But to claim ownership of the Thorn algorithm, it is absurd. It is akin to the janitor at NASA claiming he landed the rocket on the moon because he swept the launch pad." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Roman chuckled audibly. "Mr. Thorn," Judge Harriman warned, peering over her glasses, "control yourself." "Apologies, Your Honor," Roman said, standing up. He disregarded his lawyer's signal to sit down. He wanted to speak. It's funny to me. Sarah knows nothing about code. She doesn't know a variable from a vector. The idea that she contributed to the core logic of my company is insulting to actual engineers everywhere." He turned to Sarah, his eyes cold. "Tell them, Sarah. Tell them about your father. Tell them how you come from a long line of dreamers who never actually did anything." Mr. Henderson shot up. Objection. Relevance. "I'm establishing a pattern of behavior," Roman said smoothly, cutting off the judge. Her father, Arthur Jenkins, was a hoarder who tinkered with radios. He died with $400 in his bank account. Sarah is terrified of ending up like him, so she's trying to steal my success. It's pathetic, really." Sarah felt the tears pricking her eyes, but she bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. Don't let him see you cry. Not for Arthur. Never for Arthur. Sustained. Judge Harriman banged the gavel. Mr. Thorne, sit down. Any more outbursts, and I will hold you in contempt. Roman sat, looking entirely unbothered. He whispered loudly enough for the front row to hear, "We've already won. Look at her lawyer. He's shaking." The morning session was a bloodbath. Sterling dismantled Sarah's claims one by one. He produced documents showing Roman as the sole signatory on the patents. He brought in expert witnesses, employees of Roman, who testified they never saw Sarah do anything but bring lunch. By the lunch recess, the mood in the room was clear. Sarah was going to lose. She was going to lose everything. In the hallway, Sarah went to the vending machine to get a water. Her hand was shaking so badly she couldn't get the dollar bill into the slot. Need some help? She turned. It was Roman. He was alone, his entourage waiting by the elevators. He looked at her with a mix of pity and disgust. "Take the settlement, Sarah," he said, stepping closer. "Sterling is going to ask for legal fees next. You'll be bankrupt. You'll be living in a trailer park, just like your dad." "Don't talk about him," Sarah whispered. "Why?" "He was a loser, Sarah. And you know it. He left you nothing. Just a garage full of junk and a mountain of debt. I was the best thing that ever happened to you." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "You should have been grateful I kept you around as long as I did." He walked away, laughing as he joined his lawyers. Sarah stood there, clutching her purse. Inside that purse was a letter she had received only yesterday. It was from the executor of her father's estate, a small-time attorney in Ohio. It simply said, "We found a box in the attic. The judge needs to see this." She hadn't shown it to Mr. Henderson yet because she didn't think it mattered. It was just Arthur's stuff. But Roman's words, "He left you nothing," rang in her ears. They went back into the courtroom for the afternoon session. "Defense rests," Sterling announced smugly at 2:00 p.m. "We see no need to drag this out. The plaintiff has no evidence of ownership." Judge Harriman looked at Mr. Henderson. "Does the plaintiff have any further witnesses or evidence?" Mr. Henderson looked at Sarah, ready to shake his head and accept defeat. But Sarah stood up. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. It smelled of old paper and soldering iron. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice trembling but gaining strength, "I have new evidence. It concerns the origin of the Thorne algorithm." Sterling laughed. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. We haven't seen this." "It was discovered yesterday," Sarah said. "In the belongings of my father. The man Mr. Thorne claims was a failure." Judge Harriman looked at Roman, then at Sarah. "Bring it up." Sarah walked to the bench. She handed the envelope to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Judge Harriman opened it. She pulled out a stack of notebooks, old grid-lined engineering notebooks, and a single, stamped legal document, dated 5 years before Roman started his company. The courtroom went silent as the judge began to read. Her eyebrows shot up. She flipped a page, then another. She looked over the top of the papers at Roman Thorne. For the first time all day, Roman didn't look arrogant. He looked confused. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harriman said, her voice icy. "Mr. Thorne, you might want to come up here, and you might want to stop laughing." The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Roman Thorne walked to the bench, his gait still somewhat confident, though the smirk had vanished. His lawyer, Marcus Sterling, moved with the urgency of a man realizing he was standing on a landmine. Judge Harriman laid the notebook open flat. The pages were yellowed, the grid lines faded, but the ink, blue ballpoint, pressed hard into the paper, was unmistakable. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you recognize this handwriting?" Roman glanced at the page. He squinted. Then his face went pale. It was a pallor that started at his neck and drained the color right out of his cheeks. He knew that handwriting. He had spent hours staring at it 6 years ago, trying to decipher the genius hidden within the scrawl. "It looks like Arthur's," Roman stammered. "My ex-father-in-law. But this is irrelevant. The man was a hoarder. He wrote nonsense in notebooks all day. Recipes, conspiracies, radio frequencies." "Is that so?" Judge Harriman flipped a page. "Because this doesn't look like a recipe to me. It looks like a sequence of predictive algorithms for high-frequency data passing. And right here, at the top of page 42, is a header." She turned the book around so the gallery could see the back of it, but she pointed specifically for Roman. Written in block letters was, "The Thorne-Jenkins Protocol, Draft 4. "It's dated," the judge continued. "August 14th, 6 years ago. That is exactly 3 months before you registered the copyright for the core code of Thorne Dynamics. And Mr. Thorne? The math on this page? It is identical to the proprietary architecture you presented to this court this morning as your sole invention." Sterling, the high-priced lawyer, snatched the notebook from the bench, a breach of protocol, but he was too panicked to care. He scanned the equations. He looked at his client. "Roman," Sterling hissed, his voice dropping an octave. "You told me you wrote the source code from scratch. You told me there were no other contributors." "I did," Roman's voice cracked, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I did write the code. Arthur he just gave me some ideas. We talked about it over dinner. He didn't build the company. I built the interface. I sold the product. He just scribbled some math on a piece of paper." "So you admit he contributed?" Sarah spoke up from her table. She hadn't walked to the bench, but her voice carried clearly across the room. She was standing now, looking at Roman, not with fear, but with a dawning realization. "He didn't contribute!" Roman shouted, spinning around to face her. The vein in his forehead bulged. He was an old man, tinkering in a garage. He didn't know how to monetize it. He was useless, Sarah. I took his gibberish and made it worth $1 billion. That makes it mine. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Harriman slammed her gavel. "Silence." She turned her gaze back to the notebook. "This document is notarized," she said, delivering the final blow. There is a stamp on the last page from a notary public in Portland, dated 6 years ago. Arthur Jenkins didn't just write this down, he legally recorded it, and in the margin, there is a note. The judge adjusted her glasses and read aloud, her voice echoing in the stunned room. "Roman is a bright boy, but he lacks the patience for the bridge logic. I'm giving him the keys to the kingdom today. I hope he treats Sarah right. If this works, half of it belongs to her. It's her dowry, whether he knows it or not." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. The gold digger narrative had just been obliterated in 30 seconds. Sterling looked at the judge, then at Roman. He closed his briefcase. "Your Honor, I request an immediate recess to confer with my client regarding this new evidence." "I bet you do," Judge Harriman said dryly. 30 minutes? And Mr. Thorne, if you leave this building, I will have the marshals drag you back in chains." As the bailiff called, "All rise," Roman stood frozen. He looked at Sarah. For years he had made her feel small. He had made her feel like a parasite, feeding off his brilliance. But as he looked at her now, he realized the terrifying truth. He wasn't the host. He was the parasite. He had fed off Arthur's genius and Sarah's support, and now the host body was rejecting him. Sarah met his gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked at him with the cold, hard eyes of a woman who finally knew her worth. The conference room adjacent to courtroom 4B was small, windowless, and currently filled with the sound of Marcus Sterling screaming. "You lied to me!" Sterling threw his expensive fountain pen against the wall. Ink splattered across the beige paint like black blood. "You sat in my office, you looked me in the eye, and you told me the IP was clean. Do you have any idea what you've done? That's perjury, Roman. That's fraud." Roman was pacing the small room, sweating profusely. He had loosened his tie, and his perfect hair was disheveled. "It's not fraud, Marcus. It's interpretation. Arthur gave me the notes. He gave them to me." "Did he sign a transfer of IP rights?" Sterling barked. "Did he sign a work-for-hire agreement? Did he sign anything?" "No. He was my father-in-law. We were family." "And then you divorced his daughter and cut her out?" Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "God, you are arrogant. You didn't just steal the candy. You stole the candy store and then sued the owner for loitering." Sterling slumped into a chair, rubbing his temples. "Okay, listen to me. We are done. I cannot win this. That notebook is a smoking gun. The notary stamp makes it bulletproof. If we go back in there and fight, not only will you lose half the company, but the judge might refer this to the district attorney for criminal fraud charges, theft of intellectual property, perjury." Roman stopped pacing. "Criminal charges. Yes, you idiot. Criminal, prison, orange jumpsuits, no McLaren." "So what do we do?" Roman asked, his voice trembling. "We settle," Sterling said. "Right now. We go out there. We offer her the 50%. We pray she takes it and agrees to a non-disclosure agreement, so the stock price doesn't tank when the world finds out the genius CEO is a fraud." Roman stared at the wall. "I can't give her 50%. The board will remove me. I'll lose control." "You've already lost control, Roman," Sterling yelled. "The only question now is whether you lose it from a mansion or a jail cell." Meanwhile, out in the hallway, the atmosphere was entirely different. Mr. Henderson was sitting on a bench next to Sarah, beaming. He looked 10 years younger. "Sarah," he said softly, "do you realize what your father did?" He knew. He knew Roman might try something like this. Sarah was holding the yellow envelope, tracing her finger over her father's handwriting on the front. "He never told me," she whispered. "He never told me he invented the algorithm. He always let Roman take the credit." "Because he loved you," Henderson said. "Arthur didn't care about money. He cared about you being happy. As long as you were married to Roman, Arthur was happy to let Roman play the big shot, because it provided for you. But he kept insurance, just in case." Sarah closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. She could picture her dad in his garage, wearing his stained flannel shirt, looking over his glasses at Roman. She remembered how Roman would come over, frustrated and angry because his code wasn't working, and her dad would calmly pour him a tea, sit him down and say, "Let's look at the logic, son." Roman hadn't built the empire. He had just marketed her father's kindness. "Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, opening her eyes, "I don't want to settle." Henderson blinked. "Sarah, they are going to come out of that room and offer us exactly what we asked for. 50%. Maybe more. It's an instant win." "No," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "It's not about the money anymore. If I settle, he gets to keep his reputation. He gets to stay the visionary. He gets to sign an NDA and bury my father's legacy again. What do you want to do?" "I want the truth on the record," Sarah said. "I want everyone to know that Thorn Dynamics was built by Arthur Jenkins. I want Roman to say it. Under oath." At that moment, the door to the conference room opened. Sterling and Roman walked out. Roman looked like a beaten dog, but Sterling had his mask back on. "Mr. Henderson," Sterling said, approaching them, "we have a proposal, a very generous proposal. Mr. Thorne is prepared to offer your client 55% of the marital assets and a lump sum of $10 million, effective immediately. In exchange, we seal the court records and sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement." It was a fortune. It was more money than Sarah could spend in 10 lifetimes. Henderson looked at Sarah, waiting for her to nod. Sarah stood up. She looked Roman dead in the eye. "No," she said. Roman's head snapped up. "What? Sarah? That's insane. It's millions." "I don't want your money, Roman. I want the company," she said calmly. "All of it. Or at least the controlling interest that belongs to my father's estate." "You can't have the company," Roman hissed. "You don't know how to run it." "Maybe not," Sarah said, "but I know who really built it. And I'm not signing an NDA. I'm not hiding the truth. We're going back into that courtroom, and I'm going to let the judge finish reading that notebook." "Sarah, please!" Roman stepped forward, his voice desperate, dropping the act entirely. He reached out to grab her arm, but Henderson stepped in between them. "Sarah, if this gets out, the stock crashes. The company becomes worthless. You'll be inheriting ash." "Then let it burn," Sarah said. "I'd rather have the truth in the ashes than a lie in a castle." She turned and walked back into the courtroom. The gallery was buzzing. The reporters were leaning forward. As Sarah took her seat, she noticed someone new in the back of the room. It was a man in a dark trench coat, rain-soaked, holding a briefcase. He wasn't a lawyer. He looked like an engineer. He was staring at Roman with an intensity that matched Sarah's. Roman saw him too, and for the second time that day, the color drained from his face. "Oh God," Roman whispered to Sterling. "That's Miller." "Who is Miller?" Sterling asked, exacerbated. "My former CTO," Roman whispered. "I fired him 2 years ago because he found the back door." "What back door?" Sterling asked, his eyes widening. Before Roman could answer, the bailiff cried out, "All rise!" Judge Harriman took the bench. She looked at the defense table. "Have you reached a settlement?" "No, Your Honor," Sterling said, sounding defeated. "We have not." "Very well," the judge said. "Then let us continue examining the evidence. Ms. Jenkins, you mentioned there might be more to this notebook?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said. "But actually, I think there is a witness who can explain it better than I can." She turned to the back of the room. She didn't know the man, but she saw the look on Roman's face. She followed her gut. "Is there a Mr. Miller present?" The man in the trench coat stood up. "Right here, Your Honor." "Who are you?" the judge asked. "I'm David Miller," the man said, walking past the bar. "I was the chief technology officer at Thorne Dynamics until Mr. Thorne paid me $200,000 to keep my mouth shut. But I see the NDA has just been voided by perjury." He dropped his briefcase on the plaintiff's table. "I have the rest of the puzzle," Miller said, "and I can prove that Roman Thorne hasn't written a line of code in 5 years. In fact, he doesn't even have the password to his own mainframe." Roman put his head in his hands. The house of cards wasn't just falling, it was being incinerated. David Miller took the stand not with the hesitancy of a witness, but with the swagger of an executioner. He was a man who had clearly spent the last 2 years waiting for this exact moment. He was sworn in, and Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, approached the podium. Henderson didn't need to do much. He just needed to open the gate. "Mr. Miller," Henderson asked, "what was your role at Thorne Dynamics?" I was the chief technology officer, Miller replied, adjusting the microphone. I was hired 5 years ago, right after the company went public. My job description was to oversee the engineering team. But my real job was to cover for Roman. "Objection!" Sterling shouted, though his heart wasn't in it. "Hearsay. Speculation." "Overruled," Judge Harriman said, leaning forward. "I want to hear this." Miller looked directly at Roman. "Roman Thorne is a good salesman. I'll give him that. But as an engineer, he's incompetent. When I joined, I asked to see the source code documentation. Standard procedure. Roman told me there wasn't any. He said the code lived in his head. But the truth was, he didn't understand how the core algorithm worked. It was a black box to him. "And who built that black box?" Henderson asked. "Arthur Jenkins," Miller said. "I found the digital signatures deep in the kernel. The code was elegant, brilliant, and decades ahead of its time. It was written in a coding style that hasn't been used since the late 90s. Efficient, compact. Roman's additions, on the other hand, were sloppy patches on top of a masterpiece." Miller reached into his briefcase and pulled out a hard drive. 2 years ago, the system started to lag, Miller continued. "We needed to update the core architecture to handle the increased user load. I told Roman we needed to rewrite the base code. He panicked. He forbade anyone from touching the Jenkins kernel. He was terrified we'd break it, and he wouldn't know how to fix it." "Is that why you were fired?" Henderson asked. "No." Miller smiled grimly. "I was fired because I found the dead man's switch." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Roman had his face buried in his hands. He knew what was coming. "Explain," Judge Harriman commanded. "Arthur Jenkins wasn't just a genius. He was a protective father," Miller said. He knew Roman. He knew that if Roman ever got full control, he would discard Sarah. So Arthur hard-coded a dependency into the algorithm. It's a date check function. Every year, on Sarah's birthday, the system requires a manual authorization key, a specific 64-bit encryption key that must be entered manually. Sarah gasped. Her birthday was tomorrow. For the last 6 years, Miller said, Roman has been inputting a key he found in Arthur's old notes. But Arthur was clever. The key rotates. The sequence changes based on a pattern only Arthur knew. The list of keys Roman had. It runs out tomorrow. Miller pointed at the defendant. That's why he wanted the divorce finalized today. That's why he was so desperate to get Sarah to sign away her rights. He needed legal clearance to try and sell the company before the code locks him out tomorrow at midnight. He was going to cash out and let the buyers deal with the crash. "If the key isn't entered tomorrow?" Henderson asked. "The Thorne algorithm deletes itself," Miller said flatly. "It's a scorched earth protocol. The software that runs 40% of the global high-frequency trading market will simply vanish. The company will go from $1 billion valuation to zero in a microsecond." The courtroom was in chaos. Journalists were sprinting out the doors to call their editors. Stockbrokers watching the live stream were likely screaming into their phones. Sterling, Roman's lawyer, stood up slowly. He looked at his client with pure venom. "You didn't tell me the company was a ticking time bomb, Roman." "I thought I could hack it," Roman screamed, standing up, his composure utterly gone. "I hired hackers. We've been trying to crack Arthur's encryption for 6 months, but the old man was insane. He used a cipher based on music," Sarah whispered. Everyone turned to her. "What was that, Miss Jenkins?" Judge Harriman asked softly. Sarah stood up, her eyes distant. "My father played the cello. He taught me that math and music are the same thing. Frequencies, harmonics." She looked at the yellow notebook on the judge's bench. The notebook, the numbers in the margins, they aren't just equations. They're musical intervals. Bach's cello suites. Roman stared at her, his mouth open. He had spent millions on cybersecurity experts, Russian hackers, and brute force decryption, and the answer had been sitting in the memory of the woman he called useless. "Miss Jenkins," Judge Harriman said, "do you have the key?" "I think so," Sarah said. "My father left me a voicemail 2 days before he died. He hummed a melody. I never understood why. I just saved it because it was his voice." "This is blackmail," Roman shouted. "She's holding my company hostage." "It's not your company, Mr. Thorne." Judge Harriman's voice boomed like thunder. "And based on the testimony I've heard today, I am not just looking at a divorce case anymore. I am looking at grand larceny and securities fraud." The judge turned to the bailiff. "Secure the doors. No one leaves." She looked down at Roman. "Mr. Thorne, I am revoking your bail on the spot. You are remanded into custody pending a federal investigation into the falsification of corporate assets." 2 marshals moved toward Roman. He backed away, knocking over his chair. "You can't do this. I'm the CEO. You need me. The code dies tomorrow without me." "Actually," Miller piped up from the witness stand, "it dies with you. Only Sarah can save it now." As the handcuffs clicked around Roman's wrists, the flashbulbs of the press cameras went off like strobe lights. The golden boy was tarnished. The sight of Roman Thorne being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs was an image that would be plastered on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The video of his outburst, "I'm the CEO," was already trending #1 on Twitter before he even reached the holding cell. But inside the courtroom, the drama wasn't over. The legal proceedings had shifted from a battle for assets to a salvage operation for a sinking ship. Judge Harriman cleared the courtroom of the press to discuss the national security implications of the algorithm crashing. Only the lawyers, Sarah, Miller, and the court staff remained. "Ms. Jenkins," Judge Harriman said, her tone gentle but serious, "you understand the gravity of this? If that code deletes itself tomorrow, financial markets will destabilize. People's pensions, 401ks, bank transfers. Arthur's algorithm is the backbone of it all. Roman Thorne was reckless to an almost criminal degree to let it get this far." Sarah sat at the table, the weight of the legacy pressing down on her. "My father didn't want to hurt anyone," she said. "He just wanted to stop Roman from stealing his life's work. The deletion protocol, it was a fail-safe, a last resort." "I understand," the judge said. "But now you hold the trigger. What do you want to do?" Marcus Sterling, now acting more as a desperate mediator than Roman's defense, spoke up. "Ms. Jenkins, the board of directors of Thorne Dynamics is on the phone. They are panicked, to say the least. They are prepared to offer you the position of interim chairwoman. They are prepared to give you Roman's entire voting stock block. They just need you to input the key." Sarah looked at Mr. Henderson. The old lawyer smiled. "It's your choice, Sarah. You can let it burn, like you said, or you can take the wheel." Sarah thought about the last 10 years. She thought about the coffee shop in Portland. She thought about the late nights making Roman sandwiches while he ignored her. She thought about the humiliation of the thrift store coat and the trolls online calling her a gold digger. If she let the code die, she destroyed Roman's creation, but she also destroyed her father's genius. Arthur's code was beautiful. It deserved to live. It just needed the right operator. "I won't give the key to the board," Sarah said firmly. Sterling blanched. "But I will go to the server room myself," Sarah said. "I will input the key. But I want a new contract drawn up before I step foot in that building." "Name your terms," Sterling said. "First, the company name changes. No more Thorne Dynamics. It becomes Jenkins Systems." Sterling nodded frantically. Done. Easy. Second, Sarah continued, her voice gaining steel. Roman receives nothing. No severance, no golden parachute. His shares are liquidated to pay back every employee he underpaid and every investor he defrauded. And the remainder goes into a scholarship fund for engineering students from low-income backgrounds, in my father's name. That will be legally complex, Sterling hesitated. Roman still has rights. Roman is facing 20 years for fraud, Judge Harriman interjected. I think you'll find his bargaining position is non-existent, Mr. Sterling. If I were you, I'd advise the board to accept Ms. Jenkins's offer before she decides to hum that melody into a trash can instead of the server. Sterling sighed. Agreed. I'll draft it now. And third, Sarah said, looking at David Miller, I need a CEO who actually knows what they're doing. Mr. Miller, are you busy? Miller grinned. I think my schedule just cleared up. The trip to the tower. 2 hours later, a convoy of black SUVs sped through the rainy streets of Seattle, but this time Roman wasn't in them. Sarah was. They arrived at the Thorne Dynamics headquarters, a glass monolith piercing the grey sky. The lobby was filled with terrified employees who had heard the rumors. Security guards, who usually ignored Sarah or looked at her with suspicion, now held the doors open with trembling respect. They took the private elevator to the server floor, deep underground. The room was cold, humming with the sound of 1,000 cooling fans. In the center stood the black box, the main server rack that housed the Arthur Jenkins kernel. A red light was blinking on the console. A countdown timer on the screen read, System Purge in 041210, 4 hours until oblivion. Miller typed in his administrative override to bring up the command prompt. It's ready for the key, Sarah. Sarah took out her phone. She played the voicemail. Her father's voice, raspy and kind, filled the sterile room. Hey, sweetie, it's Dad. I know things are hard right now, but remember, life is just rhythm. You fall down, you get up. It's a progression. Anyway, I had a tune stuck in my head. C, G, E, A, followed by a low B, just like the suite. Love you, kiddo. Sarah stepped up to the keyboard. She didn't type notes. She translated them into the numerical frequencies her father had taught her when she was a little girl sitting on his workbench. 261.6. 392 so 329.6. 444. Her fingers flew across the keys. She wasn't a coder, but she was Arthur Jenkins's daughter. She spoke his language. She hit enter. The screen froze. The blinking red light turned solid. The fans whirred louder, then settled into a steady, rhythmic hum. Access granted. Welcome, Administrator Jenkins. Next authorization required, 365 days. Miller let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. We're live. The system is stable. Sarah put her hand on the cold metal of the server. She felt a strange warmth, a vibration that felt like a cello string. Thanks, Dad, she whispered. The fall of Roman Thorne was swift and total. The SEC investigation revealed that Roman had been cooking the books to hide the fact that he couldn't update the software. He was indicted on 12 counts of fraud, perjury, and embezzlement. The Golden Boy traded his penthouse for a 6x8 cell at the Federal Detention Center. His assets were frozen. His McLaren was auctioned off. His friends in the tech world deleted his number and pretended they never knew him. But the biggest twist was yet to come. During the discovery phase of the criminal trial, investigators found a hidden folder on Roman's personal laptop. It contained drafts of a memoir he was planning to write, titled The Soul Genius. In the draft, he explicitly admitted to destroying Arthur's original physical prototypes to erase the trail. This admission sealed his fate. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict him. Sarah didn't go to the sentencing. She didn't need to. She was too busy. Jenkins Systems was thriving. Under Miller's technical leadership and Sarah's ethical guidance, the company had shifted focus. They stopped selling predatory trading algorithms to hedge funds and started working on public infrastructure projects, optimizing power grids, traffic systems, and hospital logistics. Sarah kept the old thrift store coat. It hung in her office, right next to her father's framed patent, as a reminder of where she came from. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received a letter from prison. The return address was Roman Thorn. She sat at her desk, the city of Seattle sprawling below her, a city she now helped run. She looked at the envelope. She thought about opening it. She thought about reading his apologies, his excuses, his begging. Then she remembered the way he had laughed in the courtroom. She remembered him calling her father a failure. She took a lighter from her drawer, the one she used to light candles for her dad. She set the corner of the envelope on fire and dropped it into the metal wastebasket. She watched it turn to ash, just as Roman had predicted her inheritance would. But out of the ash, she had risen. The fall of Roman Thorn was not a quiet slide into obscurity. It was a violent crash that shook the foundations of the tech world. In the weeks following the standoff in the server room, the dismantling of his life was absolute. The federal investigation, sparked by Judge Harriman's court order, unearthed a rot far deeper than anyone expected. Investigators found that Roman hadn't just stolen Arthur's code. He had been running a Ponzi-like scheme to secure venture capital, using projected profits from an algorithm he couldn't control or update. The final nail in his coffin came from his own arrogance. During the seizure of his digital assets, forensic analysts recovered a deleted folder on his cloud drive. Inside was a draft of his autobiography, tentatively titled The Sole Genius. In Chapter 4, Roman had written, in his own words, "The old man's prototypes were dangerous. I had to destroy the physical evidence to ensure the market saw only me. Arthur was the architect, yes, but I was the one who bulldozed the lot to build the skyscraper. History only remembers the builder, not the architect." It was a confession signed in hubris. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the back of the same courtroom where Roman had once mocked her. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. There were no smirking lawyers. Marcus Sterling had recused himself, leaving Roman with a weary public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When the gavel came down, it sounded like a thunderclap. 20 years for securities fraud, perjury, and embezzlement. Roman didn't scream this time. He didn't shout about being a visionary. He simply slumped in his chair, looking small, grey, and utterly ordinary. As the marshals led him away, he turned to look at the gallery, searching for a sympathetic face. He found only Sarah. She didn't look away. She offered him a small, sad nod, a final acknowledgement not of his worth, but of his end. 1 year later, the Seattle skyline looked different. The massive, glass-paneled skyscraper that once bore the neon blue letters Thorn Dynamics had been rebranded. The letters were gone, replaced by a modest, elegant logo in warm gold. Jenkins Systems. Sarah stood in the executive office, formerly Roman's penthouse suite. The cold bachelor pad aesthetic of black leather and chrome was gone. The room was now filled with plants, warm wood furniture, and light. David Miller, now the acting CEO, knocked on the doorframe. "You ready, Sarah?" he asked. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. We're approving the expansion of the Arthur Jenkins grant for underprivileged engineers." "In a minute, David," Sarah said, staring out at the rain-slicked city. "I just have one piece of old business to finish." She picked up a letter from her desk. It had arrived that morning from the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably Roman's. She had read it only once. It was a masterpiece of narcissism. Even from a prison cell, Roman couldn't let go of the narrative. "Sarah," it read, "I know you're angry, but remember who put you in that office. We were a team. I pushed you. I made you tough. Without me, you'd still be a graphic designer in Portland. I need a character reference for my appeal. You owe me that much. We built this empire together." He still didn't get it. He thought the empire was the money. He thought the empire was the building. Sarah reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a long, silver lighter, the kind her father used to light his pipe in the evenings. She didn't feel anger anymore. She just felt a profound sense of clarity. "I wasn't the graphic designer you saved, Roman," she whispered to the empty room. "I was the artist who drew the line you couldn't cross." She flicked the lighter. The flame danced, reflecting in her eyes. She held the corner of the envelope to the fire. She watched the paper curl and blacken, the words, "We were a team," turning into grey ash that floated down into the wastebasket. She didn't wait for the fire to go out. She turned her back on the smoke, picked up her portfolio, and walked out of the office to meet her team. Later that evening, Sarah drove out of the city, leaving the corporate world behind. She pulled up to a small, unassuming house in the suburbs, her father's old house. She had bought it back from the bank immediately after the settlement. But she hadn't moved in. Instead, she had transformed the garage. The door rolled up to reveal a bustling hive of activity. It was the Jenkins Innovation Lab. A dozen kids from the neighborhood were there, huddled over workbenches, soldering irons in hand, computer screens glowing with code. It smelled of ozone, sawdust, and potential. In the center of the room, framed on the wall, was the original yellow notebook, opened to the page with the musical cipher. Sarah walked over to a young girl who was struggling with a robotic arm. The girl looked frustrated, on the verge of tears. "It won't work," the girl grumbled. "The code is broken." Sarah knelt down, just as Arthur used to do. "The code isn't broken, sweetie," she said softly. "It's just out of tune. Listen to the hum of the servo motors. Can you hear the rhythm?" The girl closed her eyes and listened. It's skipping a beat." "Exactly," Sarah smiled, tapping the girl's screen. "There's your error. It's a rest note where there should be a tone. Fix the rhythm. Fix the code." The girl typed in a correction. The robot arm whirred to life, moving in a perfect fluid arc. The girl beamed, her face lighting up with the pure joy of creation. Sarah stood back, watching the scene. Roman was rotting in a cell, obsessed with his lost millions. But here, in a grease-stained garage, the real wealth was being generated. Her father wasn't a failure. He was a seed. And finally, after the long, harsh winter of Roman thorn, the garden was in full bloom. So, what is the real takeaway from the fall of Roman thorn? It's that arrogance is a loan with a very high interest rate, and eventually, life comes to collect. Roman thought he could build a kingdom on the back of a man he deemed a failure, failing to realize that true genius doesn't need to scream to be heard. It just needs to work. He mistook Sarah's silence for weakness and her father's poverty for stupidity. But in the end, the gold digger wasn't Sarah. It was Roman, frantically digging for gold in a mind he didn't possess, only to bury himself in the process. Sarah proved that the most powerful inheritance isn't a bank account. It's the truth. What do you think? Did Roman deserve a harsher sentence, or is fading into irrelevance the ultimate punishment for a narcissist? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and justice, please smash that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.